Okay, so welcome everybody. My name's John Weber. I'm the team lead here at Software Toolbox. Also, I have your instructor, Mark Holback, here on video. I also have Ganesh and Win from our team on here to assist in Q&A chat questions. Logistically, we're going to go through the presentation. There is a Q&A and a chat panel that are available in the WebEx interface. If you're having a logistical problem, you could please use chat. If you have a question about the content, please use the Q&A panel. That will allow us to easily answer your question, and if appropriate, share it with everybody who's here. If it's a private question, we of course will keep the answer private. We'll probably save most of the questions to the end unless the question is one that myself as host and the other team members determine would be helpful to answer as we go along, in which case we'll let Mark know that. So with that, before we get going, I do want to put a poll out there and help Mark understand if any of you have used the tool, the software tool that he's teaching today before. So let me go ahead and open this and get Mark some feedback. And you should have a polling panel on your screen that opened up. Okay, seeing some answers coming in here. Give this a couple minute or two, Mark, and I'll get you the summary results, Mark. Okay. You may want to go ahead and unmute Mark at this point. Okay. Okay, Mark, looks like, so far I'm going to give, we've got about 70% of the people have responded so far, few in progress. And you don't have to answer the poll, it just helps Mark to tailor, but it looks like at least half of them have it's totally new to them. So you'll want to keep that in mind as you go along. Okay. I have a couple that have used extensively, and then a batch that have used it a little bit, or an equal amount that are aware. So, okay. Okay. So let me just do one thing here, Mark. I will, I'm just going to screenshot the poll results and put them over in your private messaging for you, Mark. Okay, and let's move on. I know you have a lot. We have a lot to cover today here. So I'll leave the poll open here while we get started, so that we can continue to get feedback. But I don't think you'll see a drastic change. So, okay. Well, before we get started, the tool that Mark is going to be teaching today is a software tool called OPC Router. And this tool is designed and used to integrate data at the OT shop floor level, but also the front office IT business level, but also cloud systems, IoT and IoT systems. So the number of things Mark could show, he could teach classes all day long on it. Today is a basic intro technical training to help you see how to do some things. I'm not going to spoil it for Mark. I'll let him cover exactly what he's going to teach. He has some visual examples, and then he's going to jump right in and start teaching. At the end, we are going to ask for feedback in the form of a poll, both on how Mark's teaching went. We're always interested in improving and making this better, these training sessions better, but also what other topics you would want to. We really want these virtual learning series we do to be driven by what interests you, because this is about you and your knowledge. So with that, Mark, I'm going to go ahead and turn the presenter ball over to you, sir.
Thanks, John.
Yes, sir. Take it away.
Let me share my screen here.
Okay.
All right. And first off, also from me, a very sincere thank you for the absolutely enormous turnout we're having today. I appreciate you guys taking the time out of your day to join us today. As John said, this is a technical demonstration of the OPC router, a little bit of technical training. I'm glad to see that we have a mix of people across the spectrum as far as experience with the OPC router goes. This is, I think everybody's going to get something out of this, or I hope everybody gets something out of this. We're going to talk a little bit about the basic workflow, how to design a OPC router configuration, talk a little bit about what it can do. But as John mentioned, with the number of plugins that we have access to in the OPC router, we can spend multiple weeks sitting here talking about all the different plugins and all the different use cases. So we're going to focus on two today. The first one is going to be just a very basic demo or use case that I think everybody's implemented in some form or fashion with some solution. And that's going to be, how do we take some data from an OPC server, that's our top server in this case, and log that data to a SQL database. And we're going to do that with one point just to see how quick we can get that done. But then we're also going to scale that through the use of templates, which we'll get to here in a moment. And then we'll flip that around. We'll do something that not every solution can do. We'll take the data out of SQL through some event-based polling, some new data, making it into the database. We're going to run some logic through that in the OPC router scripting engine, and then we're going to write the results back to our OPC server and our PLC. And hopefully in that process, we get to touch on a lot of different features of the router and drive some good questions and good discussion. With all that being said, let me jump right into the OPC router. There's a lot to this UI. I'm going to be touching on just about every piece of this at some point during this demonstration. But for now, just quick intro to the key components. On the left-hand side here, we have our different UI areas. The top one being our plugins, and we have our connections, where we do most of our configuration. We have our templates, which you will get to see today to some extent. We have our staging area where we get to see what we're pushing to the runtime service. And then we can our state monitors. So for now, just know they exist. We'll touch on all of those in more detail in a moment. One thing that we will not do as part of the training today is go through the installation process and the licensing process. They're not complex. We do have a very excellent quick start guide that we can email out to people if they're interested, that walks you through the licensing, the installation. But that was time we figured it was better spent going through the technical piece today. So that's something we won't be covering as part of this.
Mark, I'll give everybody access to the quick start guide when we send out the recording. I'll include a link to that.
Great. Thanks, John.
Yes, sir.
So the first piece when we're designing an OPC router configuration is we have to define our endpoints. We have to define our plugins. So what that means is a plugin is the OPC router's connection to the outside world. So this is going to be applications out there in our factory, on the shop floor, in our system that we want to get data out of or we want to get data into. So if we go back to that basic example, we're reading data out of an OPC server, our top server in this case, and we're going to be pushing it to a database. So the two plugins that I have to configure here are going to be one, the OPC DA server plugin, and the Microsoft server plugin. So these are going to represent the data source and data destination once we get deeper into the configuration. So really easy to do. If we double click the OPC DA section, we can add a new server plugin. I'm going to give it a name. And then because it's an OPC DA connection, we just need to now browse to our server, and that's actually all the configuration that I have to do. I can go in and I can play around with the update rates and dead bands, and we can configure redundant data sources. There's a lot of configuration I can do. It's just not something that we're going to do as part of the technical. That's all the configuration that I need. Notice I didn't have to browse to tags. I didn't have to define what data items I'm actually interested in. At this point, all I'm configuring is there is an OPC server out there that I'm going to be interacting with once I start configuring my connections. Now let's do the same thing for my SQL Server instance. You can see that I already have one defined here. Let's actually delete that because we'll be recreating that. Add a new server connection. So this is my local SQL instance. This is locally hosted, so this is running on my local machine. And I'm going to go ahead and enter my credentials. And we can now see we can browse the databases available in my SQL Server, of which there's only one. As with the OPC DA plugin that I just configured earlier, we have all sorts of redundancy and timeout settings that we can configure. We're just not going to configure it as part of the technical demo today. I can check my connection, which confirms I am able to connect to that database. And that's all there is to the plugin configuration. Now you see the plugin list is long. There's a lot that we could configure, but for the most part, the configuration I did here is going to carry over into all the other plugins. There's going to be some plugin specific, settings, of course, but for the most part, they're very quick configurations. So from here, we've configured our data source and our data destination. Going right down the left-hand side here, let's configure a connection or data flow. I like to refer to them as. So let's add a new connection here. I'll call this our demo 1 connection. At this point, we get to start building our data flow. And in order to build that data flow, I'm actually going to jump right over here to our toolbox over on the other side of the UI. And these are all the components I have available to build these connections, to build these data flows. Now I've created an OPC DA plugin and a database plugin. So those are going to be the two components that I'm going to just click and drag to my workspace here. So you notice they're not instantiated. There's no configuration showing. They're just generic OPC DA server and a database object. So to configure them, let me double click this, and we're going to bind this to an instance, this is a top server instance, a DA connection that I just configured earlier. And now I'm going to get to go and browse to the tags that I'm actually interested in. So just a standard tag browser. And I have some simulated data in my server. So let me just add one of these tags, and we can browse right to that. So this would pull out the value. Now what I can also do, I will need something to trigger this connection. So if I come to my OPC trigger area again over here in my toolbox, I'm going to add a data change trigger. Move this out of the way here. And again, I'm going to bind this to my top server, and I need to specify what item I want to monitor. So again, I'm just going to monitor that same simulated tag. I'm actually going to use the metadata output from this. So what that metadata output does is it gives us access to the quality, value, timestamp, and the item name of this connection. And I'm actually going to delete this. We don't even need this in here right now. There's multiple ways to set up this logging. We're just going to use the value of our trigger item to log this. That makes it a little simpler. So you can see after I've bound my data change trigger to this SymTag1 in my server, we now get access to the value of that tag, to the quality, the value, and the item name. So now let's configure our database. Again, I'll double click the database instance and pull that up. We'll need to bind that to our SQL Server container instance. And the type of interaction that I want to do with that database is I want to insert data into it. And you can see we can delete it, we can call store procedures, we can do a lot with it. In this case, we're logging data, so we're just wanting to insert that data in. So the next step here is we need to select our table, of course. I have a router logging table already built, and you can see the columns that I have access to as part of that. So these are columns that I can use if I want to, I don't have to. So you can see by default, they show up in the available columns area of the configuration, and I don't have any that I'm using right now. So I'm just going to add all of them. We're going to make sure something gets logged to all of these columns in our database. So from here, it's click and drag. It's really easy to bind these. So the value of my trigger, I want to, of course, go to my tag value column. My quality ID is going to go to my quality column. The time is going to go to my OPC timestamp column. The item name is going to go to my tag name column. I'm not going to do anything with the quality string, which is just going to be the string good or bad. You can see there's two columns here that I haven't done anything with. One of them being the system time and the other the system ID. So just as part of this demo, we don't have to populate these columns all from the same data source. So just because we can, let me throw something in here. I'm going to grab this variables object out of my toolbox. You can see there's a few variables already defined, one of them including the system time. So this is this timestamp of the system where the OPC router instance is running. So let's log that just in case it's different than the OPC timestamp that my OPC server is sending me. And then a system ID. This is just going to be a constant value that this OPC router is logging. In scenarios where you might have multiple OPC router instances or multiple data sources logging to the same table, logging some sort of constant lets you easily identify where that data is coming from. So I'm just going to log a constant value of 1. And that's it. Now that's actually all there is to this configuration. We have a trigger that's going to drive these data inserts to the database, and we can see that we're pushing all of these values to our database. So the next step is going to be we just need to push this configuration to our runtime service, which there's a little button right up here in the top left corner, set connection productive. So let's click that. And you can see it actually jumped me all the way down here to this go productive, this staging view. That gives you an opportunity to review what changes you're making to the runtime service. The highlighting of these components is very important. Highlighted components that are green are going to be new components that you're uploading to the runtime service. In this case, this was a new connection, so they're all green. Anything that's red would be getting deleted from the runtime service, and anything yellow would be unchanged. So I'm happy with my staging view. So I can hit the set connection productive button again, and you can see this is now going to push it up to the runtime service. I'll give that a moment. So because I configured new plugins, I'm going to have to restart the service as part of that, which is what it was warning me here. Push that up. Because my service isn't currently running, it needs to start as part of that. And that's all there is to it. So this is now running in my runtime service, and we're actually going to jump all the way down here to this last part of the UI, the state view, and we can monitor this demo 1 connection. And we'll give it some time to initialize here. We will see in the monitor view at the top here when those data transfers start happening, and then I'll jump over to SQL and we can see the data get inserted there as well. Give this a moment to initialize. Since the service wasn't running when we did this upload, it's going to take it a while to go through startup. Which while that's happening, talk a little bit about what this state view lets us do. It lets us monitor what the current state of these connections are. That includes data transfers, what the current values are that are being transferred. Lets you see the current state, so we can see this yellow means it's initializing and it's checking connection. And then it also lets us see a history of all data transfers that have happened in the past. This is going to go through its initialization now. And what we're looking for are these little green dots that are going to start appearing at the top here, symbolizing our data transfers. And there we go. That's what we're looking for. So each of these little green dots symbolizes a data transfer. This is logging data that's changing every second. So we're expecting these update just about every second. And the height of the dot shows us how long it's taking to complete that data transfer. Now, the other thing that we can look at here, we can actually see the live values that are getting transferred right here in our state monitor. So some of the ones that are kind of cut off at the end, we can mouse over and we can see what the value is that's being transferred. So we can kind of get a feel for how this flow is doing and how it's behaving. The other important piece of this, and the cool feature of the OPC router, we can actually see a full listing of all data transfers that have happened. So we can see every data transfer that's happened going back quite some time. And this is also configurable. So how long the data gets maintained here, or retained here rather, is something that we configure as part of the OPC router, just general settings. And just in case you don't believe me, we can also jump in here and let's query this guy really quick, and we can see the data get generated here. So as expected, there's no big surprises. We can see that the same values that we saw on the OPC router side now manifesting here in SQL Server. So that's actually all there is to the first demo. It's really quick and easy to go in and set up logging. But if I were on your side of this training, I would now sit here and say, well, I don't have to just log one point very often. Usually it scales a little bit. So I don't really want to have to configure this connection 100 times if I'm wanting to log 100 points. And so I promised I'd show you a basic introduction to templates. So let's do that. Let's create a template from this connection. Right click on the connection, we can create a template from this. Give it a name, and we can show where do we want this template to be created. And then it'll automatically create our template here. So if we jump down now, we can see our demo 1 connection template. Let's open that up and see how that's different from our actual connection. And in case you missed it, it did open up a new tab at the top here. And you might say, well, that doesn't look any different at all. And you're not wrong. What templates allow us to do is they allow us to now designate one of these fields as being dynamic. So let's say that I don't want to monitor SymTag1 every time that I create one of these connections. I want this field to be dynamic. So if I hit the little plus button next to that field, it sets it to be dynamic. And this is now something that we can populate as part of using this template to create instances. So let me show you what I mean by that. We can see this now no longer has the tag name in here. It's just an OPC address. And let's scale this a little bit. Let me look at my top server. So I have 5 tags here that are ramping. So let's create 5 instances of this. So I want to create multiple instances of this template. So I just right click on that template and select that option. And just to open for a second. So what we end up seeing is something that looks a lot like Excel. And the reason being is it is really a lot like Excel. So let's give our instance a name, instance 1. And just like Excel, we can click and drag this down. It'll auto-populate all the way through instance 5. And our OPC address here, let me actually double check whether it's in the channel, send me the device. Channel. And you don't have to type this out. If you have this stored somewhere in an Excel file, you can copy and paste this in easily enough. And then SymTag1 through SymTag5. 1, so that's our first tag that we want to monitor. And we want to monitor all the way to SymTag5. So that's all there is. I now create my instances. Oh, actually, I guess I have to select which template I want to create the instances of. And there's my 5 instances created now. So if I go back to my connection view, you can see I've scaled my one single demo login connection to 5. where instance 1 is logging SIMTAG1, instance 2 is logging SIMTAG2, and so on. This extra panel that's opened up is showing me any dynamic fields that I designated in my template and what the value was that was provided when the template was created. In theory, I could have made each and every one of these fields dynamic, and we really could have made this template completely configurable, but for a basic demo, I just wanted to make that tag something that I can change easily. So now I have 5 connections. Let's set all of them productive. And what we will see, let's set all of these guys productive. You can see again, we see this green color because we're uploading something new to the runtime service. Now we'll jump over here and monitor our state. So this instance 5, I think the tag was updating every 5 seconds. So this is going to be logging a lot slower than our instance 1, but we can see our instance 5 has changing values. And if we now jump over to our SQL Server and rerun that file, we can see we have some variety in here. So now it's not only SIMTAG1, but we have 5, 2, 3, 4 being logged too. And so that's how easy this could be to scale. As with anything, there's multiple ways that I could have logged these values. We could have used different triggers or different transfer objects. But for a very basic logging scenario, that's as easy and as quick as it can be. And if you're not just logging one tag, you're logging 1,000. Well, you can use templates to quickly create those 1,000 instances. So from there, I say let's jump right into something a little bit more complex. Unless John, Win, Ganesh, any burning questions that I should get to now?
Not supervised, but I do want to bring up one thing. There is one question that came up is, obviously in this section you're teaching, it's very database focused. And I did just have another question, so we'll get to that one that just came in a moment. Which, for folks that maybe have IT experience and have worked with things like Microsoft SQL Server Integration Services or SSIS, they may be going, okay, well, what's really different around that? And, than this. And, my answer that I sent back, but I wanted you to highlight was those transfer objects over at the side. And maybe you want to open up the other data sources, because this tool is not just about database. It's about the challenge of the fact you have all these OT shop floor systems, business systems, cloud systems, and giving you a place to pull them together and all those together in these visual workflows. I don't know if you can add anything you'd like on that.
No, I think that's exactly it. I think the MS SQL is an easy one, just as a technical training to default to, because SQL Server instances are easy to spin up. But this can do things like integrate SAP systems or other ERP systems. We can pull data from MQTT brokers or published MQTT brokers. We can expose REST APIs. Connect to file-oriented databases like MongoDB. There's a lot that we can do that we're just not going to have obviously the time to talk about today. No, that is, and maybe jumping the gun here a little bit. We'll talk about this more towards the end. There are more webinars that we're considering around some of these other pieces. But you're absolutely right. Right now, these 2 demos that we kind of picked for this training event or more database focused. That is fair to say.
Sure, and I'll have a poll that I'll put out at the end with some sample virtual training class topics that Mark's considering, and then an area you can put for other. And give us your feedback so we can prioritize what Mark teaches on. I'm going to move on to one other question here is, rather than log the data down in columns, what if we need to put the data across fields, i.e. SIMTAG1, SIMTAG2, SIMTAG3?
Yeah, so that's also possible. And let me show you really quick how I would do that, because that's actually when I was setting this up initially before I went to this data trigger configuration. That's kind of the route I was starting to go. So if you're using more of a wide table format where you have each column, what's what I would do is use this OPC DA transfer object that I pulled up initially. And when you bind it to that top server instance, one thing that we can do here is we can add multiple tags that we're interested in. So let me just add these 5 tags all to the same object. Oops, let's not add that one twice. There we go. And so whenever this trigger fires, I could just transfer these 5 tags over, and in the 5 columns I would push those to would then be syntag 1, syntag 2, syntag 3, syntag 4. Obviously, if I were to try to start this now, we get a huge mess because none of the data types match up. But it would be that when you populate these columns from your database or your table, you would see your tag values, and you probably have one column for your system timestamp. But now when your data chain triggers, we can trigger fires, or we can have a timer trigger, or any sort of trigger that you want to trigger off. We can then push those 5 values over to the C table.
Okay. Okay. Alrighty. Alrighty. So another question is: are there tag limits on the number of tags that you can handle in these applications?
I'm going to answer this carefully. None that I've run into. I'm sure there are limitations, probably resource limitations just from the machine side. We've done some pretty massive implementations of these connections. Typically, when I'm, the other question or the other side of this that we typically get is, well, can we have multiple connections or multiple data transfers all defined in the same connection? And the answer is yes, but the more granular you make these connections, the easier it is to troubleshoot, and the easier to work with. So there's really not limits, at least none that we've come into, as long as we can work with the product. But I'd love to hear a little bit more about what kind of scale you're talking about before I just say there's absolutely no limit. I think there's a big difference between.
Well, for example, this individual, I know that he's been sharing some application details, and I don't want to go too far in the weeds because obviously we want to do the second part of the class and then circle back. But it sounds like he was doing something with 150 tags coming off an OPC server being logged at a 1 second interval. And I think based on some of the stuff you've done, that's a pretty light application for this, isn't it?
Yeah, 150 tags at a 1 second update. I see no reason that wouldn't work. And on that 1 second update, let me just pull it over here. We have a time trigger, which is kind of the easiest trigger to configure, where you just specify at what interval should this trigger fire. It defaults to a second. So if I were to push this, productive to the runtime service, as long as my database columns actually match, this trigger would force these 5 tags to be logged every second. But yeah, 150 tags doesn't give me any concern.
Okay. All right. Well, at this point, let's move on, folks. If you continue to have questions, put them in Q&A. I will certainly circle back to them. Let's carry on to the second part of the teaching here, Mark.
All right, perfect. So the second scenario and I'm going to delete some of these instances, just we don't need them in here anymore. The second scenario I want to talk about is, what if you don't want to get the data from OPC to SQL? What if you want to do the opposite? You have some data that's already being historized in the SQL database, in the SQL table, and you want to be able to trigger off new values getting logged and run some logic in the OPC router. So let's call this a demo 2 connection. Let's do that. So in this connection, and let me pull up our database. I've already logged some data just to kind of show you what I'm visualizing here. So for this very specific scenario that I'm gonna set up here, I have some cycle states. And we're logging the state of our cycle, and we're logging the time that state change. So in this scenario, a state of 0 means our cycle has stopped. A state of 1 means our cycle is running. And we can see how long that cycle was active based on the timestamp. And what I want the OPC router to do in this scenario is I wanted to calculate how long that cycle was active, how long did that cycle take, and then push that information down to our OPC server. Let me just go ahead and order this by. All right, order that, make it easier. All right, perfect. And then, so this is the opposite of what we just configured. So the first thing that we'll want to do is we want to read out when that cycle started so that we can record what that cycle start timestamp is. So if we look under our triggers here, we have a database trigger. Let's add that because that's going to be able to monitor our SQL table for new values. And then at that point, we want to read out a SQL value. And we need to store that value somewhere in the OPC router so that we can do some math on it. So what I'm going to propose is we just create a variable, just an internal variable to the OPC router to store that cycle start time. So again, these are just generic components. And from here, we can, let's start configuring this a little bit more specifically. So on our database trigger, let's open that up and set it to our instance, our SQL database. We'll need to select the table, of course, that it should be monitoring. And again, what columns do we want it to actually monitor for new values? In this case, I'm just going to add all of them. So any time it detects a new ID, a new state, or a new timestamp, this will trigger. But I do want to filter it. I obviously don't want this trigger to fire every time that a new value is logged. I only want this to fire when we get the notification that the cycle has started, because I want to use this to record what the cycle start time is. So let's add a filter. Now the field that I want to filter on is the state, and I want that state to be equal to 1 for us to know that the cycle has started. Down here in this preview, we can kind of see this logic. And if you're familiar with SQL, the SQL syntax, the way this reads is select these fields where in state equals 1 is kind of how the SQL statement will read out. And the way this is now configured, this trigger will only fire if a new value is logged to our SQL database and if that state of that new value is 1. Now the other thing, I'm going to disable this trigger and connect. I want this to only trigger on new values. So that's all there is. So this trigger is now going to fire anytime that a new cycle start value is logged to my SQL table. Now, when that happens, what do I want to do? Let's query some data out of the database. Again, set it to my SQL server instance, and I want to select some data out instead. I'm going to set this to my cycle state, and the data I want to bring out of here is the timestamp. I'm going to add all of them just because we're just going to use the timestamp. But I'm going to add the same filter here. I only want to pull the timestamp of the value if the state is equal to 1. So I'm going to add this. We can see, unlike with the database trigger, I can actually access the value of all of these. And the actual filter value is dynamic. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to drag a constant value in here, 1. So whenever this fires, we can see that this database is going to query out all of these fields where the state equal to 1. The other piece of this I want to do is I only want it to return 1 value. I want it to return the latest one. So I'm going to limit the number of records this returns. And I'm going to make sure that the order is sorted descending based on our, let's call it our ID, sure. So that what this is going to allow us to do is make sure we're only getting the latest timestamp returned to us. We're not going to get every single value queried out where this condition is true, since if we go back to our SQL table, we can see there's multiple rows here, or multiple records where the state is equal to 1. We only wanted to return the latest value that was just inserted. So with all that being said, let's do OK here. And now I need to actually do something with this timestamp. So let's create a variable here, create a new one, cycle start time. We'll give it a static data type here of date time. The default value is fine. And so now we can store that timestamp in the cycle start variable. So the cool thing about these variables is they can be shared between connections. So I have this one connection that all this is going to be doing is it's going to be recording a cycle start time. And now I'm going to configure a second connection that's going to trigger when the cycle ends, and then it can run some logic to basically calculate the difference between the cycle start time and the cycle end time. So let's do that. Before I set this productive, let me go ahead and set up our demo 2 connection and cycle. And just as with the start cycle, we're going to basically configure this in a similar fashion, where we want this to trigger any time that a new value is logged that the cycle has ended. We're going to need to read what that timestamp is. We'll, just as with the other one, we'll want a constant value. And in this case, we're going to use a script that we'll write to calculate the difference between those two timestamps, and then the resulting duration we're going to write to an OPC server. So I've worked with the product a little bit, so I know what components I need to add. You don't have to add all these components to the workspace right at the beginning. You can just add them as you go along. But what we're going to do here, we're going to set up our database trigger. And again, this is going to monitor that cycle state table. It's going to monitor all fields. And because we're monitoring for when the cycle ends, we're going to monitor, or we're going to filter based on that state is equal to 0. So this is going to trigger any time that a timestamp is logged of a cycle ending. And when that happens, we want to read that timestamp out of the table. So same thing we did with the other connection. Let's add these over. I'm going to add a filter where our state is equal to 0. And again, we just want to read back the last timestamp. We don't want to read out the last 100 records. We're just interested in the latest one. Oops. And we're going to filter that by the ID. So same deal. We now have access to all these data values. The state that we're actually interested in is going to be state 0, symbolizing that the cycle has stopped. So now let's start connecting some of these items together. And we're going to write this once it's been processed by our script to a tag in our server here. Tag 6. So the last thing, and arguably probably the most important thing that we now have to do, is we need to write a script that can calculate the time difference between the starting timestamp and the ending timestamp. Let's add a new script here. Duration. And so you can see, if you're familiar with .NET or Visual Studio, this should look pretty familiar. OPC Router has a very extensive scripting engine built in, and we are now going to define some variables that we can push data to and pull data out of. So setting, we're going to edit parameters, and we're going to have 3 variables or 3 parameters that we're going to work with in this script. We're going to cycle start time. Start. We're going to have a cycle end time. So these are going to be the variables that we've read out of SQL, and now we need a duration that we're going to calculate in this script. So we've given them names, and the parameter direction here is going to be, are these input parameters that are being pushed into the script, or are these parameters are going to be read out of the script. You can see we're going to have 2 inputs and 1 output. We can have a parameter be both, but in this scenario, that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And then our data types here are going to have 2 timestamps, and the duration is going to be in seconds. I'm going to do it in 32 here. So now we have these parameters available. See them now in our toolbox here on the side that we can work with those parameters. And from here, it's just a matter of writing the script. So I know you guys don't want to necessarily see me sit here and code. So I've actually have this copied out to the side. But you can see the general syntax is it's .NET code. So our duration variable is going to be our cycle end time. We're subtracting our cycle start time, and then we're pulling out the total seconds of that duration. There's a lot of error handling that I could do that I'm not doing as part of this. It is just a demo script. But let's see if this compiles or if I fat fingered anything. So we can see right here at the bottom, it's compiled successfully. So let's save our scripting. This. And as with all the other transfer objects, we can now see that we have access to the cycle start and end time, or excuse me, values and the duration. So we already know the duration is going to be pushed to our OPC UA server here, our OPC DA server, excuse me. And then we are reading out the cycle end time down here. So that's going to populate cycle end. And that cycle start time, we're saving to that variable that we set up in our other connection here. So we actually do need one more object, which is our variables object. And it was our cycle start time. Pull that out. And so that is this full connection. So compared to our first demo where we looked at just logging a single tag, you can see that these connections can be pretty verbose and run some more complex logic. So this obviously has a scripting component where we're running a custom logic, but now we're pulling data points from other connections into this one. We're pulling from multiple data sources. We're pushing to multiple data sources. So from here, let's set this productive and see if how this works. So same thing, we monitor our staging. And because we've configured new plugins, that script that we wrote, we do need to restart the service. Now this is going to push this up to the runtime engine, and then we can play with it a little bit and see if everything works the way we hope it does. So let's jump over to our state monitor, and we're going to monitor both connections here, and we can see how even. So once these initialize, we'll log some values to that SQL table. Let's see what happens down here.
Mark, that restart only service is only when you're adding new plugins to an existing project or initially doing a project. If you're modifying, if you realize, oh, I need to adjust my script a little bit, you can deploy that change without restarting the service?
It would require service. So anytime you go in and you modify the plugins, you add a plugin, you remove a plugin, or you modify an existing plugin, it will require that it restarts that service.
Okay. This is people are trying this on their own at home. You don't want to get frustrated and go, hey, why didn't my change work?
Right. Yep. No, it does require that service restart if you're modifying the plugins. The good news is it does notify you that, hey, it doesn't restart the service for you. It does tell you, hey, if you continue with this, we'll need to restart the service. And we are in good shape here. So let's insert a new value here. I'm going to drag this off screen so that I can do our inserts. And if I change this query, and I'm going to insert a value of 1. And I'm executing this here now. So once this picks up, we can see this just triggered, and we can see that the current timestamp, the UTC timestamp, was logged to that cycle start time. So now I'm going to wait a few seconds, and then I'm actually going to jump over here, and I'm going to do the same thing, except I'm going to trigger our cycle stop. And what we should see is we can see that cycle start time here update, and we can see that the cycle duration was 26 seconds. So when I jumped over to this, you saw there were a bunch of ugly numbers everywhere. Those were because I forgot to change this database trigger not to fire on startup, so that was a configuration mistake. And that's kind of why we want that database trigger to only fire once it's detected that value. But this is also something in the script. We can add error handling. Obviously, if the values don't make sense, we can't have a negative duration or the duration that goes above a year. We can add some logic to the script itself. So let's do that one more time. Let me log a 1 here. Our cycle started. We'll wait a few seconds. And I'm going to log a 0 that our cycle ended. So we should see this update here. You can see that cycle lasted 8 seconds. And if I pull my my SQL table over here and we take a look at the cycle states here, you should see that this should have lasted about 8 seconds, which we can see. If we look at the time difference here, the difference between the cycle starting and stopping was 8 seconds. So I know there was a lot of configuration that was done very, very quickly here in the interest of but the idea here being we can really get relatively complex with these data flows. This doesn't have to be single data source to single data connection. They can flow together, and we can add all sorts of selection logic here that we want. So with that, I'll open it back up to questions.
Okay. So can I connect to a stored procedure, send data from a PLC, which is going to trigger that stored procedure from OPC Router, which that stored procedure is going to return one or more values, which you then need to get back to the controllers. Not asking you to show exactly how to do that and build that, but could that be done?
Yes, absolutely, and that's actually something I meant to mention here as I was configuring this. This connection flow was to showcase certain features in the router. In reality, I probably would just write this in a stored procedure. But what we would do is we would select store procedure here in our database transfer object, and then rather than selecting a table, we would have to select the store procedure we want to use, and then the parameters we have available are the input and output parameters of that store procedure. So that does mean if our store procedure has an output beyond just the normal store procedure finished successfully or not, we can access that output and then do with it what we want, just like any other data.
Okay. Okay. I'm going to go ahead, Win, and address this one. If logging a large amount of data from an OPC connection to a database, is it better to have multiple data blocks in the same connection or one very large data block in the connection? And I know Win had already put some stuff here that he felt the limiting factor is how fast the database can accept the inserts. But whatever you'd like to add to that.
Yeah, I think honestly, it's tough to answer without knowing the number of data items and how the table's formatted. So there's multiple factors that come into that. From an OPC router perspective, we would want multiple connections to find. This point is absolutely true. If we're overloading the database and it can't handle the data as quickly as we're sending it, we need to design for that in the OPC router. We can do either. It just really depends on how many tags we're talking, or how the database is designed.
Okay. Well, if the person who asked that would like to chat with Mark, about the specifics of your application, we could certainly arrange for that, and I'll reach out to Win will reach out and facilitate that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, let me look here. And actually, Mark, while this is going, because some people have to go, I do want to go ahead and open the final poll. to get some feedback here for you on this about both what other people would be interested in, feedback for us, how to make these training classes more helpful. So I'm going to open this while we do other Q&A here, folks. So let me go back into here. Can you execute okay, well, there's several here. Can the stored procedures run from packages, or do they have to be procedures outside of packages?
I'll be perfectly honest. I'm not sure I understand what you mean by package.
Well, in SQL Server, you can put together packages. Like if you're using the SQL agent, I believe, to automate things. So now I think he's asking, could those packages be called? Let's take that one, Marcus, in offline research. This is from somebody that also I was going to ask Wynn to arrange to be able to have a private chat with you. And they were also asking, can you execute a function, or is it only stored procedures? And that may be one you want to take offline.
I can't answer it. It is only stored procedures.
Okay.
We would not be able to execute functions.
Okay. Is there any issue with running the OPC server on the same machine as the OPC router?
No, and as a matter of fact, that's how I'm running it here. So here's my OPC router, and I can have it running on my local laptop. I will put in the disclaimer: if you don't have it running on the same machine and you're using OPC DA, you'll have to worry about DCOM. But the OPC router can handle OPC UA connections as well. So if your server supports UA, and you have to make a remote connection, I recommend going that route.
Okay. Just give me a second here. I have some. Okay, got some good. Yeah, there's some good questions. There's some that I'm going to want to. Let me scroll back through here. Okay. Why is my Q&A panel locking up on me? Maybe because I've answered them all. I don't know here. Hold on a second, folks. Q&A panel's being persnickety. Hey, Wayne, can you scroll back in the Q&A panel and see if there's any others that we need to answer? If not, I've got one from Chad I'll put out here.
We got them all so far.
Okay, maybe that's wise because we've answered them all. So there was one from Chad, and this may be one we also want to have an offline chat discussion about. But Mark, you're familiar with the concept of a data diode. This is more of a cybersecurity thing, is where I hear this most often. Where you're only allowing data to pass one direction. And the person was asking about using the OPC router for a one-way data diode. And I'm pretty sure I know the answer. I also know part of the answer is, well, we need to know more about your application. But if you want to answer that generally as best you can, that'd be great.
Yeah, and I think it definitely could be used, this one. I mean, the data flow and all of these connections is one direction. So any of these arrows I've drawn, if I wanted the data to flow back the opposite way, I'd have to draw another arrow. So in that case, this database will only ever be read from to populate data for this connection, and the same with an OPC UA server. This connection is basically write only. There's no read back happening there. And if we were to jump back to our first demo connection, which has been it's much uglier now than it was initially. These connections are read only. We're not writing back to the OPC server at that point. From a security standpoint, it is one directional communications. If I now wanted to go, like I said, and make one of these, write connections, I would need to draw the arrow into the OPC server. So these arrows, the direction of the arrows do matter in whether a component is written to or read from.
Okay. So the person who asked that, if you have, you'd ask that in chat, if you have some follow on with that, that you would like us to answer globally here, go ahead and put that in chat while I address another question, and let me know via chat if you'd like us to get back with you for a private discussion. So this next one I'll go ahead and take, and I'm going to put a link out here. So people asking, okay, licensing, how does this work? You start with a starter pack of base functionality, depending on what you're trying to accomplish, and then you just add it. It's modular. You add in the modules that you need. We have some example packages that I'm going to push a link out in answer to this question to the group where folks can go look. The examples we have on this page, they're just a few because there's so many different things. So it's really not necessarily based on the transfer objects per se, but Mark, you can kind of explain the difference there.
Yeah, so it's basically by plugin as far as the licensing goes. So like John mentioned, there's a base license that includes things like service and some of these base transfer objects. The scripting engine is included as in part of that base license. But the rest of these features are licensed by the idea being that if you're only interested in SQL to SQL communications, you don't need to buy the OPC plugin. It's just the SQL database plugin you would need. So yeah, it is absolutely, it's very granular at what we can do with the licensing. And to that point, the other question that always comes up, so I'll touch on it. If you want to expand your installation to add features later on, that's also no problem. It's just you already have your base license. You would just get the add-on features.
Sure. And there's nothing associated with number of users and number of tags in any of this. Paying for the functionality you use. So don't pay for what you don't need. So, okay. Somebody did ask about a ability to try this out, and everybody when has pushed out a link into the chat on this. This link will also be in the email we send with your recording of the training, because some of you may want to sit and follow along and try this. So, and the demo is fully functional. You can try anything. Just when you go productive, that'll run for 2 hours, and then it will stop being productive or doing anything. So, okay. Someone else, Mark, has asked, and I know the answer, but you're the instructor. You can answer it. Is what about industrial protocols like Ethernet, IP, Modbus, TCP, and Profinet?
So not supported directly through the OPC router. So this would be the next stage up. You would still need an OPC server or something that translates it to OPC sitting between that. This would not go to those devices directly. It's not to say that'll never happen. It's just not something that's supported right now. The one exception to that would be OPC UA. Obviously, there's devices out there now with embedded UA capabilities, so we could connect to those devices directly. But for something like Ethernet IP or Profinet, we would still need that OPC server in the middle.
And there's just so many great OPC servers out there. It's like why reinvent the wheel? That's something we've kind of always. I mean, I realize it's you have two pieces, but the OPC standards, particularly you're running if it's DA and you're running on the same machine, are so ubiquitous and solid. If you're going to run cross machine, highly recommend you use OPC UA. If your OPC server is on this computer and OPC routers in this, just use OPC UA. All your major OPC UA servers support it. If you have an older one that doesn't, there's conversion to products and tools out there. We have an OPC gateway product that allows you to convert DA to UA very easily. So, I mean, you could technically, I suppose, put another OPC router over there and use it to do that too, because it's has a UA server plugin. But Mark, you want to answer this one about virtual machines? I'd say, are there any concerns about running this on a virtual machine?
No, absolutely not. As a matter of fact, I mean, this is running on my physical laptop here, but most of my other test systems are running this on a VM. Absolutely no reservations or concerns at all.
Okay. Very good. Okay, and let's check the polling. The polling is going to close in 30 seconds. So if you haven't given Mark feedback, hurry, hurry, hurry. Okay. All righty. I appreciate everybody who who has given us feedback. There's some of you I know had some more specifics, and we're going to reach out to you. The individual who just sent the private question Q&A. We'll have Mark Mark and Wynn will facilitate getting him in touch with you. Thank you. Oh, is scripting part of the base package, Mark?
Yes, it is.
Yep. Everybody gets it. Okay. I'll wait another minute or so here for any other questions, and then we'll wrap this up. And really do appreciate the feedback too on other topics, Mark. We've had kind of universal, the 4 topics you put out there, all had universal interest among folks who stuck around and who did answer. So that's good. I think it's probably going to be your choice on which one you choose to teach next.
Goes first, sure. Well, and that makes it easy then that we will schedule some additional webinars around those topics.
Sure. And if you think of something afterwards, folks, that you want us to teach on, take your confirmation email, just reply to that. Wynn and I get those replies, and then we can get it over to Mark or whatever. We're always looking for feedback and appreciate it. Okay. Go ahead, Mark.
I'll add to that just these other webinars, these other features, because they're feature specific, we'll have the opportunity to go into a little bit more technical depth on those specific features as opposed to just a more general introduction, which this was intended to be.
Sure. Okay. All righty. Well, and Mark, we had majority of the folks who did answer the poll said the technical content quality was just right, and Wood said they'd recommend this to others. So good job there, and we appreciate that feedback. All right, well, let's wrap this up. Thanks everybody for attending this class. I will share one quick slide here to tie this off. Completely forgot we need to do that. We got going on our Q&A and having a good discussion there. So we do have some upcoming classes on totally different technical topics. The registration links are found here, and we'll put this in the link in with your email that you get with your recording. And so Ganesh, who's with us today, will be teaching this one, and Wynn will be teaching this one. And we'll be getting more on the calendar. I've sent out that link, and if you're in the U.S. and Canada, you want some help, you can reach. This goes into a pool, but Mark does see this email because we are the preferred partner for OPC Router for the U.S. and Canada. Other locations in the world, there are local partners for the product available at this location, and we'll be also arranging for local partners to get involved if you have questions. So thanks everybody, and have a good rest of your day, and thanks for sharing this time with us today.